I'm repeating myself at this point now, but 1991 and 1992 were really jammed-packed with Simpsons video games. This is the 9th game we're looking at, and only just the final game that released across 1991 and 1992. The Simpsons were at their peak of popularity in the early 90s, and the amount of video games released show how desperate companies like Acclaim were to cash in on that. We're not only going to be moving on from 1992 after this game, but we're also going to be saying goodbye to Imagineering. They were the first to start making Simpsons games back in February 1991 with Bart vs. the Space Mutants, but they never moved past making Simpsons games for the NES and the Game Boy. They were the 8-bit developer. Space Mutants may have been ported to lots of systems, but Acclaim were hiring new developers to make the true next-gen titles. The 16-bit era was in full swing. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and Street Fighter 2 were the two best-selling games of 1992, and video games were changing and moving on. Imagineering simply wasn't a part of that transition to 16-bit for Simpsons games, so that leaves us with one last NES game to look at from them. Imagineering's final Simpsons game was Bartman Meets Radioactive Man, which released in December 1992, just in time for Christmas. Bart vs. the World was last year's Christmas game, releasing in December 1991, so here's another NES Bart game for the next holiday season. There's lots of people who played Bart vs. the Space Mutants. It was a big hit, and you could get it on most platforms at the time. A good amount of people played Bart vs. the World. It didn't sell as well, but it came out on the NES when lots of people had an NES, and The Simpsons was experiencing its most popular year ever. I don't think many people played Bartman Meets Radioactive Man. It only came to the NES and Game Gear, and there were so many other games released that year, including Krusty's Funhouse that also came to the NES in September, that it's gotten a bit lost to time. You can buy copies of Bart vs. the Space Mutants for dirt cheap online, but Bartman Meets Radioactive Man is much harder to find. This game got featured in some advertising, but not much. It didn't seem to get as many reviews from magazines at the time. It came out, a few people bought it, and everyone moved on. People focus on games like Bart's Nightmare or The Simpsons Arcade when talking about early Simpsons games, rarely touching upon titles like Bartman Meets Radioactive Man. I've never played this game before, and I'm very curious to see what the game is all about. This is the 5th game from Imagineering based on The Simpsons. It's got to be at least decent. Let's give it a go and see if Bartman Meets Radioactive Man can help redeem Imagineering. Bartman Meets Radioactive Man starts with a cutscene showing Bart reading a comic book in his treehouse late at night. He's reading a Radioactive Man comic, but notice that Radioactive Man is missing from it. Suddenly, Fallout Boy, Radioactive Man's sidekick, appears in front of Bart and explains that Radioactive Man has been kidnapped and sent to the Limbo Zone with supervillains stealing his powers. Bart transforms into Bartman and sets out to defeat the villains, get back Radioactive Man's powers, and rescue his favourite superhero. This is the 3rd time that Bartman has appeared in Simpsons video games so far, so before looking at the story of this game, let's go into some history of Bartman. The term Bartman started from the song Do the Bartman, which released in late 1990 and became a hit in early 1991. It had an animated music video showing Bart dancing and getting the whole of Springfield to dance with him. A quick aside while I'm talking about Do the Bartman, Bart's House of Weirdness was actually inspired by parts of the music video. The initial cutscene of House of Weirdness recreates shots from Do the Bartman, and the ending cutscene showing Sideshow Bob in prison comes directly from the music video. Anyway, the character Bartman doesn't appear in the Do the Bartman music video. Bartman is the name of the dance that Bart is doing. It's hard to tell exactly what that is by watching the music video normally, but it's all about everyone having fun and doing the Bartman. I believe it's called Doing the Bartman because that's the way Bart speaks. Part of his rebellious ways is adding man to the end of sentences. So instead of doing the Bart, it's doing the Bartman in the same way that he says don't have a cow, man. The song title does combine Bart and man into one word, likely because that's the way it's sung in the song itself, but you can see it written separately in the background of the music video. Later in May 1991, we have the season 2 episode 3 Men and a Comic Book. This is where Bartman would first properly appear, where Bart tries to get into a comic book convention for cheap by pretending to be in cosplay as the superhero Bartman. 3 Men and a Comic Book wasn't the most watched episode of season 2, that honour of course goes to Bart Gets an F, but it got higher ratings than normal and was the first time in the show's run that it got higher ratings than The Cosby Show, which was its direct competitor in the early seasons. I also want to note that Bartman is also just a versatile and appealing idea. During Bartmania, the idea of Bart having a superhero alter ego and that having direct ties to the show is a strong one. Combine the broad appeal of Bartman with how well known the phrase Bartman was thanks to the Do the Bartman song, and people seeing the character in the show due to the higher than normal ratings for the episode he appeared in, and you have a recipe for a character that was used a lot. You got the games, there were comic books based on Bartman, and of course Bartman t-shirts. I don't believe Bartman was a massive part of Bartmania, but it was a very marketable idea. When I was younger, I never understood the appeal of Bartman. I'm too young to be around for when Do the Bartman was a massive hit, and Bartman himself never felt like part of the show because he only appeared in one episode. After season 2, it wasn't until season 18 that he would make his next appearance, way after the golden age of the show. Bartman is an important part of the marketing and merchandise, but it wasn't an important part of the show itself. During the DVD commentary for Three Men and a Comic Book, they don't ever talk about Bartman at all.
Pretty much the whole staff had been to a comic convention.
Yeah, we could have done the whole episode here with no plot.
Some of them had probably been to one the previous weekend. So.
The joke is that Bartman is lame, and the character is lame. Bartman to me feels like the 90s equivalent of Spider-Pig. A joke that wasn't that funny, that got overdone and repeated because of how marketable it was. Bartman doesn't connect me to the show. It feels more lazy and connects me more to the commercial side of The Simpsons, which has its own nostalgia to it, but it's still not a clever or funny idea. Having this game, Bartman Meets Radioactive Man, revolve around Bartman feels uninspired for this reason. With the video games, they're no longer trying to find creative ways to interpret the show in video game form, it's taking the idea of Bart as a superhero with Bartman and turning that into a game because it's easier. The connection to the show is minimal compared to something like Bart's House of Weirdness or Bart's Nightmare, which makes this game less interesting. Right, back to the cutscene itself, and it probably is the best cutscene we've seen from Imagineering so far. There's a bit more atmosphere, with Bart reading the comic at night in his treehouse. The artwork is still questionable. Both Bart and Fallout Boy are brown, which is the same colour as the wood behind them. Their mouths look odd when they speak. They flap, but the mouths look too pointy and weird. The end of the cutscene shows the title screen and the questionable artwork continues. I don't want to be too mean straight away, but this title screen looks so amateur. They try and use perspective to have Bart and Radioactive Man fly at the camera, but the effect doesn't work, so their heads are too big and their legs are comically tiny. This image might be the worst artwork in an Imagineering game. After the title screen there's the credits, which show this game was made by the same people as the previous Imagineering Simpsons games. That's not surprising, but this is the highest number of people working on an Imagineering game so far by a noticeable amount. In Bart vs. the Space Mutants, 13 people are credited to work on the game, with 2 of them being Matt Groening and Danny Elfman, so 11 actual developers. Bartman Meets Radioactive Man has 16 developers listed, and an extra 7 people from the Black team at Acclaim, making for a total of 23 people who worked on the game. I can't say exactly who did what on the game, but this is a big increase. No other Simpsons game from Imagineering had so many people working on it. We begin with Chapter 1, that gets this nice title card, and take control of Bartman. To the surprise of no one, it's another side-scrolling platformer. You play as Bartman and can jump, but now you can punch and kick with the B button. The first level takes place in a junkyard, where you have to jump on platforms, avoid obstacles like screws and tires, and take out enemies in your way. With this being a traditional platforming level, you will straight away notice there's no improvements to the jumping and movement. It feels the same as it did in Bart vs. the Space Mutants and Bart vs. the World. It's the same heavy jump where you can't move as forward as you would like, and the same awkward momentum. The run button is on the jump button again, so you have to jump and keep holding A to run. Not doing this and not running makes Bart walk tediously slow. There is one improvement, and that's that the super jump has been removed. In Bart vs. the Space Mutants and Bart vs. the World, you needed to press B and A at the same time to do a super jump, and that made platforming very awkward. That's now gone, which is an improvement as it makes the jumping more consistent and reliable. It doesn't make the jumping good though, it's just too heavy. You also need to use momentum to make longer jumps, but that involves holding the jump button itself before jumping to ensure you're running. There's a decent amount of precision with this jumping, but like the other games, Bart is too heavy, there's no better word to describe it. You will never overshoot a jump in this game because Bart doesn't go that far forward. This is the third NES game to feature these jump physics, and I can only include that Imagineering thought these were good. They had plenty of chances to make it feel a bit more loose and allow for a better flow for moving and jumping, but they've stuck to the same sluggish controls throughout. The fact they didn't think to make it just a bit better by their third NES game is hard to get my head around. As mentioned, the first level is the junkyard. The level design here carries on from what we saw in Bart vs. the World. Bart vs. the Space Mutants had mostly linear level design, going from left to right with no vertical elements to the levels. Bart vs. the World introduced vertical design, with a mix of going left to right and right to left with more open levels. This resulted in the levels arguably being too open, with copy and paste level design to create larger spaces. Bartman Meets Radioactive Man takes the Bart vs. the World approach and adds more focus. In Junkyard, you're going from left to right, but you have flat areas, pits to drop down into, and platforms where you can climb up to higher points before coming down again. There's a few side bits to find secrets and extra items, but there's a clear path to get to the end. Ultimately, this level design approach is nothing crazy or inspired when compared to other platformers, but when looking at just Imagineering games, the level design has improved, creating more focused but still dynamic levels. The overarching level design approach is better, but there are still specific problems with this first level. The copy and paste level design is still here. You do have to repeat identical parts of the level multiple times. You will see the exact same pit a lot, and you have to climb up very similar tiles to climb up and back down again. It's not as bad as Bart vs. the World, but the level feels a bit repetitive because of it. There's part of the levels that are just annoying to deal with. There are blind leaps of faith in the second half that if you miss your jump, you fall into a bottomless pit and lose a life. Normally in a game like this you would be able to crouch to move the camera, but that doesn't work, so you have to jump and hope for the best. Blind leaps of faith are bad in any level, but having them in the first level of your game is pretty inexcusable. With these type of moments in the level, alongside the heavy jumping and repetitive design, you're gonna die a few times trying to get through this level on your first attempt. As for the first impression of Bartman Meets Radioactive Man, there are positives with no super jump and a better level design philosophy, but the jumping and the annoying parts of the level stops it from feeling like a real improvement from the other Imagineering games. I'll say it's an okay start. After Junkyard, level 2 is the Subterranean Pipe. That's its official name, but really it's a sewer level. You go through green pipes, avoiding red sludge dripping down and riding on top of these droids. Having the first level take place in a junkyard felt pretty unique, so it's disappointing to see such a standard trope for level 2 with the sewer. What's also disappointing is the level itself. Too much of the level is riding on the droids and it gets boring after a while. You have to go up and down these vertical shafts, and you can only do that by jumping on the droids. You have to wait for them to shoot, jump on top of them, wait for them to move, and then jump onto the next one. These shafts also include instant death. If you miss a jump and don't land on the droid in time, you die. It's technically not an instant kill pit, but falling too far counts as a death. The collision on the droids is also not great. I found myself falling through them sometimes and dying because of it. This level also has enemies that you can punch and kick to take out. This game has some of the most lifeless and unclear combat I've ever seen in a game. You go up to an enemy, start mashing B to do a punch kick combo and hope for the best. There's no feedback to tell you when you're hitting an enemy. If you're close enough then it should work, but there's nothing to confirm that until you defeat them. Whether the enemy damages you feels random. You need to get in close to do damage to them, and sometimes they damage you, sometimes they don't. Also, while there are invincibility frames, there's not that many of them, so you can take multiple hits quite quickly. You can't really move to avoid the enemies once you start attacking due to the heavy movement. Combat in platformers is famously not good, and this is another case of it. It tries to have some type of combat that isn't simply like jumping on a Goomba, and it's really awful. Luckily, Bartman Meets Radioactive Man does have different powers that Bart can find. You can pick up laser eyes to zap enemies up close, or cold breath to shoot projectiles that travel further. The punching and kicking is bad, but these power-ups can be found quite frequently in levels, so you can avoid the combat altogether if you use the power-ups instead. There's also a tornado power-up you can find as well, which makes you invincible for a bit. It's not as handy as you would think it would be due to their placement. In the sewer level you get a tornado only to stand on top of a droid and do nothing. The droids in the combat are just two of the reasons why this sewer is arguably the hardest level in the game. Apart from those, there are these turrets that are placed in nasty locations, which means you're almost guaranteed to get hit by them when first playing, and you have these aggressive enemies that shoot at you that you need to duck to avoid. You can take 5 hits in this game like in Bart vs. the World, but it's so easy to take hits as you go through the level. The way the movement works just makes it frustrating to try and avoid everything. There's also another thing that makes this level tough, and that's the alternative routes. You can sometimes go through different pipes, so there isn't one strict way to beat the level. You can find items by trying different paths. It's a cool way to design a level, having different areas to explore, but it's unfortunate to have these in a level like this. You move too slowly and can take damage too easily for it to be fun to explore. Standing on the droids is boring, and trying to get past the enemies and turrets is annoying, so you don't want to spend any more time in this level than you need to. Towards the end of the level, you ride up a set of droids and can then jump across into a pipe. After going through that pipe, you can then ride down the longest shaft in the level, waiting on top of the droids until you find another pipe. In here, there are some 1-ups to pick up, which are handy, but this whole section is the wrong way to go. What you're supposed to do is jump on a different droid instead at the first pipe, and that takes you to a higher pipe where the exit is. If you go this alternative route, you hit a dead end and have to tediously ride back up the droids to go all the way back to then go the right way. Extra side paths would be okay if getting through the level wasn't such a pain. There's a good chance you'll get a game over in this level. I didn't, but I was only barely able to beat it after losing a lot of lives. I wouldn't blame anyone for giving up on this game due to the sewer level. It's way too difficult and long for the second level of the game. After surviving the sewer, it's time for a complete change of pace. Instead of platforming, you're flying through the air as Bartman and taking on different bugs and creatures that try and attack you. It's a shoot 'em up. You can move up and down, fire laser shots or cold breath, and even speed up or slow down by pressing left and right. It's a decent idea. They're injecting some variety into the game, but in a more natural way than Bart vs. the World did. Bartman is a superhero that can fly, so we have a level dedicated to flying, and it's nice to have a break from the platforming. Despite it being a different style of gameplay, it still suffers from some of the same problems as before. The movement is just too sluggish. Bart doesn't move as fast as you would like. The level is repetitive as well. You have to fight the mosquitoes for a good while, and each section of this outstays its welcome. The pacing isn't so bad that I would say this level is boring, but more moment-to-moment variety would have been nice. Shooting the mosquitoes doesn't feel great. They can move around much quicker than you can, and the cold breaths have a slow rate of fire. I stopped trying to properly aim and started firing as fast as I could and hoped for the best. The worst section though is against these bats. They fly at the top of the screen and drop, well, something at you, and that does damage. You can only take out one of the bats. One of them is always higher than you can reach with your attacks. There's an invisible barrier stopping you from going high enough to take out the bat, so you can take out the lower bat, but you have to avoid the other one. Adding an invisible wall to stop the player from reaching the higher bat feels wrong. You're trying to position Bart in the right place to dodge them, but you're too slow to truly react to the bats in a way that feels skillful. The game throws enough items at you that you can get through this level without too much trouble, but it feels like a waste. All it needed was a bit faster movement and making the bat lower, and it would have made for a decent level. It's a cool little idea that's executed in a clumsy way. The next level is the final part of Chapter 1, where you take on the first villain who captured Radioactive Man, the Swamp Hag. The Swamp Hag is a Radioactive Man villain that was taken from Season 3 of the show. This level is less of a proper boss fight. Instead, it's all about using your cold breath to create platforms that climb to the top. Once you reach the top, Swamp Hag is easy to take down by attacking her directly. Once again, we have another nice little idea for a stage. It's cool building your own set of platforms and finding your own way up. To make the platforms, you're freezing what the manual describes as balls of swamp fungi, and you're at the mercy of wherever they feel like dropping. If you freeze one and jump on it, sometimes the balls will go miles away from you or land directly on you so you take damage. The platforms only last for so long, so you can end up falling and having to start from the bottom. With enough practice, this level is okay, but like the rest of the game, it struggles to get the difficulty balancing right to make it actually all that fun. It's cool making the platforms, but when there's this random element to it with where the swamp fungi goes, it just makes it a bit more irritating than it should be. After a few punches and kicks, the Swamp Hag goes down and we restore the first of Radioactive Man's powers. there's a cutscene showing Radioactive Man stuck in the limbo zone. He explains to Bartman about the next villain, kicking off Chapter 2, the waterlogged lair of Dr. Crab. Chapter 2 mixes things up again with an underwater level. This chapter actually starts with 4 separate underwater levels: the seabed, the crab walk, the inner wall, and then back to the crab walk again. Swimming underwater is another new gameplay style. We've gone from traditional platforming to more vertical platforming to a flying level and then a unique platforming level to now pure underwater swimming. I appreciate the effort to have different types of gameplay as you go from level to level. Chapter 1 wasn't all that great to play, so starting off Chapter 2 and having it be something completely different was nice. There are 4 levels to play through which are underwater, which sounds like a lot, but each level is quite short. Splitting up the underwater section into different levels allows it to mix things up and the pacing starts to improve. There's less repetitive level design. You go from open water to caves to being tracked by a searchlight as you try and get through a dark maze. Bart is still quite slow and sluggish, but at least it makes more sense here with these being underwater levels. When it's flying quickly through the air, it's weird to move slow, but when you're in the water, it feels more appropriate. Your enjoyment of this part of the game though comes down to how much you like underwater levels. There's a bit of a stigma around them, which I understand, but I've never really minded them. If you don't like these types of levels, then it's unlikely you'll have a good time here. I'm currently praising these levels and the variety in Bartman Meets Radioactive Man, but a lot of that praise is relative to the other Simpsons NES games. The ideas in this game aren't anything all that original. The first Super Mario Bros. Had underwater levels, for example. Plenty of NES games had a mix of traditional platforming and other gameplay types to keep them interesting. This isn't something unique to Bartman Meets Radioactive Man. This gameplay variety feels like Imagineering finally catching up to the other NES games, rather than being anything that makes it really stand out. This game came out in December 1992. It's not that impressive that an NES game released that late would be willing to mix things up like that. It's pretty much standard. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 came out a month before this game did, and is miles ahead of this game with its different level types. That might feel like an unfair comparison, but they launched around the same time. With so many NES games that had been released that already matched Bartman Meets Radioactive Man with its variety, I can only praise this game so much for doing what was the minimum by the end of 1992. It's nice to see a step forward, but it's a step towards being more middle of the road, rather than standing out on its own 2 feet. These underwater levels is where I got my first game over. It wasn't due to the levels themselves being overly difficult, but because I lost so many lives back in the sewer level that I didn't have many left for Chapter 2. As always with Imagineering, there's no save systems or passwords, so a game over means starting the game from the beginning. I've been quite mixed on this type of systems when ranking these Simpsons games so far. It worked well in Escape from Camp Deadly, where the game was quite short to complete, and there was a real sense of progression each time you tried to play the game and improved at it. Bart's Nightmare managed to achieve the same sense of progression, with its grade system and randomized elements. It didn't work as well in Bart vs the Space Mutants and Krusty's Funhouse, where the levels were overly long and it got tedious having to replay so much content. Bartman Meets Radioactive Man is quite short, so I don't mind this system here. There's only 3 chapters in total, so we're not that far from the end of the game, so being able to save would make the game less interesting to beat. I could have done without replaying the sewer level every time I wanted to play the game, but I did improve at it, and knowing the correct and most direct path to the end made it easier to complete. The game is generous with lives and health. You're going to lose a lot of lives anyway, but you get plenty of chances at any given sections because they throw items at you. There's bonus levels you can find in levels as well that take place in the limbo zone, where you can get even more lives. There's also 2 continues that you start with, so a game over isn't fun, but you do have to die a lot to get a full game over and have to start again. Beating this game isn't an easy thing to do necessarily, but it's not as punishing as previous games. Beating the underwater stages takes us to the final 2 levels of Chapter 2. The first is the boiler room that goes back to platforming. You ride the conveyor belts and jump across platforms to the end. As you ride up the conveyor belt, you have to jump on these switches to turn them from on to off so you can pass. This level is another one that's okay. It's surprisingly easy compared to the other platforming levels, and also short. You can beat this level in a minute once you know what to do. The conveyor belt does its job of mixing things up by introducing a new platforming gimmick. but as I said before, it feels like the bare minimum for a platformer from this time. Finishing the boiler room leads us to the boss fight against Dr. Crab. Dr. Crab is a reoccurring Radioactive Man villain. He was mentioned in the show, had frequent appearances in the Radioactive Man comic book, and even showed up in The Simpsons Tapped Out. Dr. Crab jumps up in the air, and you have to press the B button to punch upwards, sending him flying across the room and creating a crack in the wall. Eventually he breaks through the wall, and you have to follow him by jumping into the hole he leaves. Smash him through 3 walls and he's defeated. This fight can go one of 2 ways. It can be very simple. You can bait Dr. Crab easily to do his big jump, and the timing of punching him isn't that hard to pull off. You can burn through this boss by punching him over and over. It can also be oddly difficult, and that comes down to the extra crab in the room. Touching either Dr. Crab or the smaller crab does damage, and while Dr. Crab is predictable, there's no real pattern with the smaller crab. Sometimes he'll stay on one side of the room, sometimes he comes right towards you. It feels like it changes direction randomly, and it makes it hard to predict and avoid. With how short the invincibility frames are, you can take damage very quickly if you're stuck between the two. This fight isn't too bad, but with a bit of bad luck, it can become pretty annoying. Defeating Dr. Crab takes us to the final full chapter of the game, 20,000 miles under the earth. The first level is the sunken volcano, where you're trying to find the route downwards before flying through an open area to the end. The difficulty steps up here with this being the final set of levels, where you have instant kill lava, fireballs being shot upward, and a lot of enemies to avoid. This level is another one that's okay, but the slow movement mixed with the increased difficulty can make it irritating. This is another level that splits into different paths. The goal is to find these chutes that you can jump down and then slowly descend by pressing B to help you avoid drills. The first half of the level is finding these chutes, but that's not clear at first. Going the wrong way leads you to dead ends, and with the amount of things that can damage you, you'll die by taking the wrong path. There are even enemies that you can't kill with your laser bolts because they're too short, making them invincible, and I can't understand the logic of designing enemies this way. It's another case of sloppy design. If they're immune to the lasers, that's one thing, but don't make them too low that you can't even attack them, that feels terrible. The second section is where you find a Bartman power-up that gives you flight temporarily. They give you a big space to fly around in, but you'll need to focus on where you are and what's underneath you. If you lose your power-up at the wrong time, it's easy to fall into the lava and die. This level also has a couple of tricky jumps in it. One of them is just before the open area, and it's a jump that I never did. I assume it's possible, but I died every time and would respawn on the platform I was aiming for, so never got to try it more than once in a playthrough. This level ends by jumping on these platforms and getting a second Bartman power-up to fly towards the end. I got a game over when I first reached this level, but it's doable after a few tries. The second level is the underground city, where you have to go through different doors to find the correct route in the city, with gargoyles roaming around. The level is full of beginner's traps. It starts off with these waterfalls. If the waterfall is going through the platform, it means there's an invisible hole there. There's no way that you can know this for sure on your first playthrough. The platforms are physically still there, and there's been no other mechanic like this before this point. The other beginner's trap is that if you jump off the side of buildings, it will instantly kill you. It makes no sense within the logic of the game itself, but the reason it does this is because this level is a giant maze. If you could jump between the buildings, it would allow you to skip sections of the maze. This is another bizarre design choice, like the invisible walls with the bats. Rather than adding walls to make the game's internal logic make sense, they decided to instantly kill the player. The maze requires you to go through different doors and hope for the best. There are dead ends when you go the wrong way, or it can reset you to a previous area. The resets are one way. You come out of doors that are too high for you to go back through. When there are multiple doors to pick from, you end up going around the same loop over and over trying to pick the right door. I'm not a big fan of these type of mazes in games, but they can work. They don't work in a game with slow, heavy movement like this though. It makes picking the wrong way more annoying, as you have to slowly go through the same sections over and over. There are these turrets you need to get past as well. The timing to dodge them is quite strict. It takes a few attempts to get a feel for them, and even then they're hard to avoid. I don't like this level. It's not enjoyable figuring out the maze, and the idea of this level doesn't match the style of platforming that this game goes for. It's another level I got a game over in. It can take a lot of tries to figure out the correct path, which isn't a fun process. There's only 2 full levels in Chapter 3, with the 3rd level already being a boss fight against Lava Man. Lava Man appeared in the Radioactive Man comics under the name Magmo the Lava Man. Unlike Swamp Hag and Dr. Crab, Lava Man seems to make his first appearance in this game. The comic which he first appears in, The Molten Menace of Magmo the Lava Man, was released in March 1994, over a year after Bartman Meets Radioactive Man released. Taking out Lava Man is quite simple. You have your cold breath, and you need to freeze the water drops as they fall down. Lava Man shoots fire at you, which can easily be avoided by jumping to one of the other platforms. The fight is okay, really not much to this one. It isn't as random as the Dr. Crab fight, so it's not all that bad. With Lava Man beaten, Radioactive Man is freed with all his powers restored. While the villains are defeated, it was another villain called Braino that was the mastermind of the plan, so Bartman and Radioactive Man go to defeat Braino together. Braino is similar to Lava Man. He was mentioned in the Radioactive Man comics and made appearances, but this game was the first time he appeared. The boss fight has Braino in a giant case on top of a tank, and you're given laser eyes to take him out. You do this by firing at the tank, bouncing them off the front and deflecting them off Radioactive Man. It sounds tricky, but it's another easy boss. Stick to the corner, keep firing when Radioactive Man is over the top of Braino, and you'll land your shots. There's not much precision needed. It's nice to have Radioactive Man here to help out for the final boss. The boss is just a bit too basic to be interesting. After a quite uneventful final boss, Radioactive Man thanks Bartman, there's text saying that the world is now safe again, and a shot of Bartman standing in a superhero pose. More funky artwork with his face, but the cape waving behind him looks good. With that, it goes straight back into the opening cutscene. This is the worst ending of a Simpsons game so far. It doesn't feel like you've beaten the game at all. The last 2 bosses are short and quite easy, and the ending feels very rushed. To go from Bartman posing and standing proud into the opening cutscene feels so incomplete. At least play the credits here, give people a chance to enjoy the fact that they just beat the game. It took me 6 attempts to beat Bartman Meets Radioactive Man, so it's not as difficult as some of the other games. It had its difficult moments, but actually didn't take that long. I didn't feel that same satisfaction as I did with Bart's Nightmare or Escape from Camp Deadly when I beat this. I'm glad I was able to beat it, but I can't say I got much out of it when all was said and done. So that's Bartman Meets Radioactive Man. For the 3rd Simpsons game on the NES from Imagineering, I was really hoping for more. This was a real chance to make a solid Simpsons platformer by fixing the mistakes from the first 2 games, but that leap didn't happen. The movement is still bad with the stiff awkward jumping, and little changed from the last 2 games. It's baffling that the movement hasn't improved. I feel mean saying this, but at a certain point it has to be incompetence. The level design features the same difficulty spikes that were present in the other titles. The good ideas are brought down by poor execution that puts a real ceiling on how much enjoyment you can get out of this game. On a more positive note though, the overall level design approach is an improvement over the previous games. There's a lot more variety across the game which all fit into the theme of Bartman taking on different supervillains. The levels are more refined, more focused, while still allowing for open areas and different routes to find and explore. This doesn't ultimately make it a good game because the movement is still bad and the levels like the sewers and the underground city are rough to complete. I'm glad it isn't as difficult and I was able to beat this game, but that feeds into the feeling of blandness that I felt when playing Bartman Meets Radioactive Man. By removing the environment interactions from Space Mutants and the World Tour and minigames from Bart vs. the World, you end up with a much more traditional platformer. This game doesn't do anything all that unique. The comic book theme is kind of interesting, but that doesn't elevate what is a by-the-numbers platforming game. In the end, I would say it's okay. Movement should be better, some levels are annoying, but it's mostly functional, with enough variety to get you to the end. I've been critical of every part of this game, but it never reaches the lows of previous games. It's mostly inoffensive, just a bit flawed across the board. Right, let's rank this game, and I think it's only fair to compare it to the other Imagineering games first. Bart vs. the Juggernauts has better ties to The Simpsons and the show, but Bartman Meets Radioactive Man is more enjoyable as a video game. Next up is Bart vs. the World, and this is a more difficult decision. Both games have a similar bland feeling, neither of them having strong identities to stand out, so feel more standard. I prefer Bartman Meets Radioactive Man in the end. Bart vs. the World features so much padding with its level design and minigames, and its difficulty spikes are worse than in Bartman. Bart vs. the World also has the super jump, so it does control worse. That takes us to Bart vs. the Space Mutants. The reason the NES version is quite high on the list is because of its more unique elements shown in the first level. It's a bad game, and we're talking about comparing one not great game to another not great game, but I have to say, the slight ambition and ideas in Space Mutants makes me have some respect for it. Bartman Meets Radioactive Man doesn't have anything like this, but it is the more functional game. Maybe I'm just worn out from playing all these Simpsons games, but give me something that mostly works that I can get through over a messy, overly difficult, maddening game like Space Mutants. That takes us to the highest ranking Imagineering game on the list with Escape from Camp Deadly. This is where Bartman stops climbing. Both games have their low points, but Escape from Camp Deadly was more fun to complete. Bartman has better variety and more going on, but Escape from Camp Deadly was more rewarding to figure out. Escape from Camp Deadly is decent, where Bartman Meets Radioactive Man is okay. That means it's going in at number 8, underneath Escape from Camp Deadly. I'm putting it above the portable versions of Krusty's Funhouse, which I would also describe as just okay. Bartman Meets Radioactive Man was made for the NES, where Krusty's Funhouse feels out of place on the handhelds, so I would take Bartman Meets Radioactive Man over them. With Bart vs. the Space Mutants, it got ported to every console under the sun, with Bart vs. the World getting fewer ports. Bartman Meets Radioactive Man got even less, with only one port which came out on the Game Gear. Bartman Meets Radioactive Man on the NES came out in December 1992, and during 1993, the following year, was when the Bart vs. the World ports were being released, so there was no need to port Bartman Meets Radioactive Man as well. The 16-bit consoles didn't receive the Imagineering games for the most part. Why would you port 8-bit games onto hardware where brand new games like Bart's Nightmare were being released? The Game Boy was a bit of a unique case, where it was still receiving support with new games from Acclaim due to its popularity. With platforms like the Atari ST and the Amiga becoming less relevant, that leaves the Game Gear as the only place worth porting Bartman Meets Radioactive Man. A developer called Teeny Weeny Games handled the Game Gear port, a small developer from England who handled a few handheld ports in the early 90s. They never really moved on to bigger things. They ported a few games, created the Discworld games, before disappearing at the end of the 90s. The credits in the Game Gear version only feature one person, a programmer, so this was not a high budget port. There's a couple of things that stand out straight away about this port. The first are the graphics. The colours feel a bit bolder and brighter, and the graphics have been simplified a bit. I think it looks better than the NES original. I didn't talk much about the graphics on the NES, but I would generously describe them as inconsistent. Sometimes there's lots of details, sometimes things look too simple and amateur. The NES game is all over the place with its graphics, so the Game Gear version stripping away some of the detail and changing the colours does help. I don't think either version looks great, but I'll give the advantage to the Game Gear. The second thing that stands out is the camera. It's a console game being put onto a handheld, so we have screen crunch where you're playing a game more zoomed in than it was originally designed. The solution they implemented to help with this for this port was to move the camera based on where Bart is facing. When you go left and right, the camera moves in that direction to give you a better view of what's ahead. It's a nice idea, and I like that you get some type of camera control here, but it causes the camera to move too much. Even slightly changing the direction you're going swings the camera the other way, which can be disorienting. The camera change is too sudden. It would have been better if there was a slight delay to when the camera changes to avoid times when you're trying to align yourself and the camera is jumping back and forth. Even with this camera control, there are times where it's hard to know where to go. I know the correct route through these levels, so it wasn't a problem for me, but this version will be harder to figure out with some of the alternative paths that the level design can have. They tried to keep the game as faithful as possible to the original for the Game Gear, and they were mostly successful to sticking to that. There are changes in certain levels though, the biggest one being the swimming level, where instead of trying to hide from a moving spotlight, you have to collect light bulbs to temporarily light up the area. The level design is the same, but the gimmick is completely different. The flying level in the swamp is quite different too, same level design and enemy placement, but you can no longer control your speed. It makes getting pickups much harder, and the level feels much more chaotic. You can at least shoot both of the bats now, they're lower than they were before. There are a couple of tweaks in other levels to make the game a bit easier. Like in the Swamp Hag level, they give you 99 cold breaths rather than 5 each time, and during the Dr. Crab boss fight, you get a health refill after you jump into each room. Another change I came across are the switches in the boiler room. It's much harder to jump on the switches to turn off the fans, and it's very easy to hit the fans when you're trying to use the switches. The hit collision on the fans feel much bigger than it should be, and that's a theme throughout the game. The hit collision wasn't great on the NES, but the hitboxes feel bigger here and you can take damage unfairly. The game has some performance issues too, which can make it feel unresponsive at times. With the camera changes, hit collision and performance issues, I ended up having a worse time with the Game Gear port than the NES one. Some level changes are okay and help, and I think it looks nicer, but I found myself taking extra damage in a way that felt pretty bad when playing. Couple this with the camera changes, and I'm gonna have to rank it a bit lower. I'm putting it at number 10, above the port of Krusty's Funhouse for the Game Boy, but below the Krusty's Funhouse port for the Game Gear. It feels weird putting it between the two handheld ports of Krusty's Funhouse, but when it comes to which Simpsons game on the Game Gear is better, I would give the advantage to Krusty's Funhouse. Both games here are out of place on the Game Gear, but Krusty's Funhouse is the better port, and doesn't have the technical issues that Bartman Meets Radioactive Man has. I would still take Bartman Meets Radioactive Man on the Game Gear over Krusty's Funhouse on the Game Boy. Krusty's Funhouse is a bit more boring and less fun to play on the Game Boy. With Bartman Meets Radioactive Man, we've reached the end of this chapter of Simpsons games. After releasing so many games in 1991 and 1992, Imagineering closed its doors in 1993, after releasing a couple more licensed games. Imagineering was absorbed into Absolute Entertainment, meaning Imagineering was no more, and Acclaim moved on to working with other developers for The Simpsons. Absolute Entertainment continued the Imagineering tradition of making bad licensed games, before closing down themselves a few years later in 1995 after going bankrupt. I would love to start talking about how Imagineering wasn't really that bad and how their games will always have a special place in my heart as a Simpsons fan, but it simply wouldn't be true. Imagineering was a company that certainly had ideas and concepts for games, but they never really improved as a game developer. Bart vs. the Space Mutants had a few ideas and could have been interesting, but was so far behind the competition when it released in 1991 and lacked any type of playability. Future games became more bland in comparison, going for more standard ideas which helped with Escape from Camp Deadly, but Bart vs. the World was a more forgettable mess as a result. Imagineering seemingly never learnt from their mistakes, never really improving movement, and the level design always has these awful moments and difficulty spikes. Playability was something they never figured out, as seen in Bart vs. the Juggernauts, where they crammed it full of Simpsons references and characters, but it was frustrating to play. Bartman Meets Radioactive Man was their final chance to prove themselves, and while it's far from the worst, it shows their progression from being a slightly ambitious studio who couldn't make a functioning fun video game, to ending up being a less ambitious studio who could make a slightly more functional but less interesting game. I'm sure people have some good memories with these games, but after 5 games where the absolute peak was just decent, at a certain point you have to say enough is enough. Goodbye Imagineering, I look forward to playing Simpsons games that you had no part in making. And that's Bartman Meets Radioactive Man added to the list. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this look at Bartman Meets Radioactive Man, please consider giving this video a like or leaving a comment below. I will see you next time for Bart and the Beanstalk. With Imagineering gone, it's time to see how Acclaim will handle the franchise without them. The fact they started with a Jack and the Beanstalk parody for the Game Boy doesn't fill me with confidence.